very interesting. And what struck me was that, what does anybody have to say? This is a great illustration of Judith's method, which is so hard to understand. So in all of these examples that we just heard, these presentations, the task that they engaged in was looking for cases where apparent trade-offs had been somehow resolved into positive sum outcomes, and then really throwing away the rule book and delving into them, going to the field, really disaggregating everything they saw and questioning those things and trying to understand what exactly happened, how did it happen, why did it happen, and in what ways does it speak to these frameworks and existing understandings of this phenomena that we probably started out with. So in all examples, they've been looking at cases and looking at patterns that run across these cases. In almost every case, there is somewhere or the other this issue of taking seriously the nature of the product, or the sequence of events, the way in which something happened, the nature of the policy environment, like in Anu's case, what the arrangement was in which something was done, and how that sort of broke a bottleneck or created a window, and then how the next steps followed, or the relationships between those. And here's the value of Judith repeatedly telling us to have courage and to have faith in what we're going to find in the field. So in Mansueto's case, for example, it was really fascinating. What he showed us that by following the history of how something happened, the insight that he came up with was that, well, it's important to upgrade before regulating, or under certain circumstances, in the kinds of cases that he's talking about, where the trade-off is between the sperm is informal, it doesn't really perform very well as it is, and then we tax it, and regulation placing further pressures or burdens, and he turns that around and says that, well, the outcome was really good, but how did it come about was we gave these firms the capacity to begin to do well, and then it was in their own interest to comply with the regulation. So I think this just illustrates so well the kind of method that Judith has taught us through her own work, where the insights come from really looking at what's going on the ground. And not just stopping there, but asking, well, if this happened, why did it happen at this time, and why not at other times? And like in Salo's case, why did that rule change? Why go from looking at the weight to looking at quality? What was it about it? And here I want to mention what Judith often used to say when we used to write our papers, and somebody used to say, oh, macro and links between macro and micro, and she would just have an allergic reaction and say, what does that mean? And here's an example. The macro part of it, or whatever, is this broader national sort of regulatory history that you had to delve into, or in that stage, if you will, how something came about. And there you just not looked at this particular country, but even other countries. How do they think about this? And the very micro outcome in that particular context that you were looking at generated some really fascinating insights about what happens when and why and under what circumstances these things come together. And finally, in all the cases, we saw that there was this interest in understanding why things continue and what the role of the public sector is. So this is this lesson learning, evaluation kind of research in local economic development, whose real interest is in building the capacity of the public sector in its various guises, in its various alliances and various relationships. So with that, I want to open up and see what questions came up for you, or what your own experiences have been, and if you want to share them, feel free to share your own experiences. We have about half an hour to do that, so I'll just open it up.